The Blackwood family had gathered for dinner the way they always did. Expensive wine, polished silver, old family stories, and enough money in the room to make everyone careful about what they said. Amelia Carter had served that family for 5 years. She knew which guest preferred coffee after dinner, which cousin hated the dining room lights, which medication Ethan's uncle needed before bed. But that night, none of that mattered. Ethan Blackwood stood at the head of the table and accused her of embarrassing his family. "You need to remember what you are, Amelia." Amelia lowered her eyes. She didn't argue. She simply placed the silver tray down and said 4 words. "Your father knew who I was." Ethan laughed. "My father has been dead for 8 years. Amelia looked at him. "I know." 20 minutes later, the family's attorney arrived at Blackwood Estate, carrying a letter Harold Blackwood had written before his death. The letter contained one sentence. "If Ethan ever humiliates Amelia Carter in front of this family, tell him why she was never really a servant." Amelia Carter had learned, over the years, how to become invisible. Not because she was ashamed of herself, because invisibility was sometimes the safest position in a house where everyone believed they already knew exactly who belonged where. She arrived at Blackwood Estate before sunrise. She prepared breakfast. She organized the household staff. She knew which flowers Diane Blackwood had preferred before her death, which chair Ethan's father had always used, and which hallway Ethan walked through when he was angry. Ethan knew none of that. To him, Amelia was simply the woman who kept the house running. A maid, nothing more. That evening, the Blackwoods were hosting one of their most important family dinners of the year. Ethan had invited several business associates, along with relatives who had known his father for decades. The table had been prepared perfectly. Crystal glasses, white linen, silverware that had belonged to Ethan's grandparents. And, above the fireplace, a massive portrait of Harold Blackwood, the man who had built the fortune Ethan now controlled. Everything went smoothly for the first hour. Then one of the guests noticed something missing. A small antique watch. It had belonged to Harold Blackwood. "It was here this afternoon," Ethan said. Everyone looked around. Someone suggested the staff may have moved it. Another guest glanced toward Amelia, and that was enough. Ethan turned toward her. "Amelia?" She stopped. "Did you clean my father's study today?" "Yes. Were you alone?" "For part of the afternoon." The room changed instantly. People stopped eating. Conversations died. Amelia knew exactly what they were thinking. She had seen that look before. Ethan's voice hardened. "Did you take the watch?" "No." "Then where is it?" "I don't know." Ethan stared at her. "You have access to every room in this house." "Because I work here." "Exactly." A few people shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Amelia could have defended herself. Instead, she simply said, "Mr. Blackwood, your father never believed a person's position determined their character." Ethan's face tightened. "Don't bring my father into this." "I'm not." Amelia looked toward Harold's portrait. He already brought himself into it. 10 minutes later, the missing watch was found. Not in Amelia's room, not in the kitchen, not anywhere near the staff quarters. It was inside Ethan's own study. Someone had apparently placed it there after dinner began. Ethan stood silently in the doorway. Amelia said nothing. One of the guests apologized. Ethan didn't. He simply looked at Amelia. "You can go." Amelia nodded. "Yes, sir." But as she turned to leave, she stopped. "Mr. Blackwood?" Ethan looked up. "Your father would have checked the watch's engraving before accusing anyone." Ethan frowned. "What engraving?" Amelia walked away without answering. It would be 2 more days before Ethan understood exactly what she'd meant, and by then, the watch itself would already have told him more than she ever needed to say out loud. 20 minutes later, the front doors opened. Mr. Doyle entered, the Blackwood family's attorney. He had worked for Harold Blackwood for more than 30 years. "Why are you here?" Doyle looked at Ethan. "Because Amelia Carter was humiliated tonight." Ethan went still. "What does that have to do with you?" Doyle placed an old envelope on the table. The paper was yellowed with age. Harold Blackwood's handwriting was unmistakable. "Your father left this with me." "For me?" Not exactly. Doyle looked toward the empty doorway where Amelia had disappeared. He told me to give it to you if you ever publicly accused Amelia of stealing. Ethan stared at the envelope. Why? Doyle didn't answer. Ethan opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, 5 lines. Ethan, if you are reading this, then you've finally done exactly what I feared you would do. Ethan's eyes stopped. You've judged Amelia by the uniform she wears instead of the person she is. Then came the sentence that changed everything. She is not the maid I hired. She is the daughter I failed to protect. Ethan read the sentence again, then again. He looked at Doyle. What does this mean? Doyle took a slow breath. Your father never wanted you to know this until you were old enough to understand what it meant. Understand what? That Amelia's mother was one of the most important people in your father's life, Doyle explained. 27 years earlier, Rosalind Carter had worked for Harold Blackwood, not as a maid. She had been an accountant, and she had discovered something dangerous, money disappearing from one of Harold's earliest ventures, buried so far back in the company's founding years that almost nobody still working there would have recognized the accounts involved. Millions. Rosalind followed the numbers. The trail led towards someone Harold trusted completely, his own brother. When Rosalind tried to report what she'd found, she was fired. Her reputation was damaged. Her career ended. And Harold realized, far too late, that she had been telling the truth. By then, Rosalind was raising a young daughter alone, Amelia. Your mother once mentioned something like this to you, Doyle added, watching Ethan carefully. Something separate from the trouble with Gerald Vance, years older, tangled up in the earliest days of the company. I believe this is what she meant. Ethan remembered, distantly, a conversation he'd had months earlier, a secret room, a fund, a mystery he'd assumed had already been fully solved. It hadn't been, not entirely. What Ethan didn't know was that Amelia had once lived at Blackwood Estate, not as staff, as a child, for nearly 3 years. Ethan found the evidence in an old family album, a photograph of Diane Blackwood sitting in the garden. A little girl sat beside her, 6 years old. Amelia. On the back of the photograph, Diane had written, "Our little girl." Ethan couldn't breathe for a moment. Why didn't I know? Doyle looked away. Because your mother wanted it that way. Why? Because she was afraid of what would happen if people discovered how close Amelia's family had become to yours. Ethan looked through the album again. Amelia at Christmas. Amelia sitting beside Diane. Amelia holding a birthday cake. Amelia asleep in the same library where Ethan had spent much of his own childhood. They had grown up in the same house, but they had been deliberately kept apart. Ethan finally understood why Harold had hired Amelia years later. It wasn't because she needed a job. It was because Harold needed someone he trusted, someone who knew what had happened to Rosalind, someone who understood the old financial records, someone who could watch the family from inside the house. How long did my father know she was working here? Doyle looked at him. From the beginning. Ethan's expression changed. You mean he hired her specifically? Yes. And he never told me? Your father believed you weren't ready. Ready for what? Doyle placed another folder on the table. The truth about your family. The folder contained years of financial records, transfers, shell companies, payments disguised as consulting fees. Millions moved through accounts nobody had ever questioned. Ethan followed the names. The same person appeared again and again. His uncle Robert. Robert had been managing a portion of the family investments for nearly 20 years. He had always presented himself as the loyal brother, the dependable relative, the man who had helped Harold build the company. But Rosalind had discovered the truth decades earlier. Robert had been taking money, and Harold had eventually discovered it. He couldn't expose Robert without destroying the company publicly. So he made another decision. He removed Robert from direct control. But he never told Ethan why. He also created a private trust, a trust designed to protect the family assets from anyone who tried to take them. And Amelia had been monitoring that trust for years. Ethan found Amelia the following morning. She was standing outside the greenhouse, The same place where she'd spent hundreds of quiet mornings over 5 years. She wasn't angry. She wasn't waiting for an apology. She was simply watering the flowers. "Why didn't you tell me?" Amelia continued watering. "Because your father asked me not to. He lied to me." "No." Amelia finally looked at him. "He protected you." "From what?" "From becoming like the people who hurt your family." Ethan didn't answer. Amelia continued. "Your father believed that if you knew everything too early, you'd spend your life fighting everyone around you. He wanted you to become someone who could hear the truth without needing revenge." Robert arrived at the estate that afternoon. Ethan had asked him to come alone. "What's this about?" Ethan placed the financial records on the desk. Robert's face changed, only for a second, but Amelia noticed. She always noticed. "You stole from my father." Robert smiled. "Be careful, Ethan." "I'm not being careful anymore." Ethan pressed play on a recording. Harold's voice filled the room. "Robert, if you're hearing this, then I've finally run out of time." Robert's expression collapsed. "I know what you did. I know what you took. And I know Amelia has been watching the accounts for years." Robert looked toward Amelia. "You." Amelia didn't move. "Yes. You were never a maid." Amelia looked at him. "I was exactly what your brother needed me to be. Someone you would never think to watch. And I already know what you did with the real watch, Robert. The one in the study that night was never his. You've kept the original hidden since the week you first started moving money. The same habit you've had for 27 years, replacing the real thing with something close enough that nobody would look twice." Robert said nothing. He didn't need to. Ethan turned toward Amelia. "Did my father really think of you as his daughter?" Amelia looked toward the old family portrait. "Your mother did. Your father tried to. But I never needed the Blackwood name. I needed them to remember my mother's name." Ethan finally understood. Amelia hadn't spent 5 years trying to become part of the Blackwood family. She had spent 5 years making sure the Blackwood family remembered what it owed hers. Ethan could have taken the records to the authorities. He could have destroyed Robert publicly. He could have turned the entire family against itself. Instead, he remembered his father's final instruction: "Don't become what you're fighting." Ethan turned the evidence over to independent investigators. Robert was removed from the company. The stolen money was recovered over time, and Rosalind Carter's name was formally restored to the company's historical records, 27 years after she had been pushed out. Her daughter finally received the recognition she had never asked for. Several months later, Ethan changed the name of one of the estate's foundations. He named it after Rosalind Carter. Amelia stood beside him during the ceremony. No uniform, no servant's tray, no lowered eyes. Just Amelia. Ethan looked at her. "My father was right about one thing." Amelia smiled slightly. "Which thing?" "I spent years looking at what people did for me, instead of asking who they were." Amelia nodded. "Then maybe you finally learned." Ethan looked toward the old house. "I did." He paused. "And I'm sorry it took me 5 years." Amelia smiled. Some truths take longer than 5 years. Behind them, the portrait of Harold Blackwood remained in the entrance hall. The same man who had known the truth long before anyone else. The same man who had trusted a young woman to protect the family he was leaving behind. A person's worth is never determined by the uniform they wear. Sometimes the quietest person in the house knows the most. Sometimes the person everyone thinks is serving the family is actually the person protecting it. And sometimes, the truth isn't hidden because someone wants to lie forever. It's hidden because someone is waiting for the right person to finally be strong enough to hear it.